Little Red Riding Hood, in which Little Red, Scarlet, is a spaceship pilot whose grandmother has mysteriously disappeared, and the only person willing to help her is a city street fighter who goes by Wolf. And of course, as we all know from the fairy tale, he's a totally trustworthy guy, right? That's not suspicious at all. So that's the basic premise of the series. It will be 4 books total. Book 3, Cress, is modeled after Rapunzel, and book 4, Winter, is based on Snow White. So okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about like where did these books come from? Where did this idea come from? And I can pretty much trace the start, like that initial idea, back about 15 years when I was 14 years old, and my best friend introduced me to the most awesome show ever created. So show of hands, who has heard of a little show called Sailor Moon? I love Canada. You guys are so cool. Yeah, so okay, Sailor Moon, you all know. For like the 2 of you who did not squeal, Sailor Moon is it's a Japanese anime that was super popular in the 90s, and it was about these teenage girls who, like, one day they met a talking cat, and the cat's like, here's a magic wand, now wear really cute skirts and go fight monsters. And that's what they did. And there was also a guy in a tuxedo. Which, oh, swoon. Swoon. So I started watching this show, and I totally fell in love with it. And I started writing stories using this world and these characters, and I soon came to discover that this was a thing many people did, and it was called fan fiction, and that there were whole archives and websites online where you could post these stories and other fans could read them and respond to them, and I'm like, that's the coolest thing ever. In part because up till now, you know, I always wanted to be a writer, but until this point, everything I'd written had kind of lived in my little spiral notebooks, and I didn't share them with anybody. And now this whole world opened up to me of Sailor Moon fandom and these websites where I could post my stories and have reader feedback, and it was the most amazing, wonderful thing. So I did that for 10 long years, and wrote about 50 fanfics during that time, and had a lot of fun and made a lot of great friends, some of whom are actually here today, which is very cool. I think I heard Angel laugh. So that went on for 10 years, and then one day I heard about a writing contest that was happening on a Sailor Moon website, and the girl who was hosting the contest had made a list of 10 things, and you had to choose 2 of them and include them in a short story. So from her list, I chose to set it in the future. I'd never written science fiction before, but I loved Star Wars, so I thought that sounds like a really fun challenge. And the second thing from her list was that I chose to include a fairy tale character, because I love fairy tales, and I've always loved fairy tales. And so I started to think, okay, what do Sailor Moon and fairy tales have in common? Well, they both have talking cats. So I decided to write a short story science fiction retelling of Puss in Boots, which is one of my favorite fairy tales. And I did, and I submitted it to the writing contest, and I thought, oh my gosh, that was so much fun to write. Well, a couple weeks later, I found out that mine was one of only 2 stories that had been entered into the writing contest. It came in 2nd place. However, not to be put off by that, I thought I really enjoyed writing this. What else can I do with combining fairy tales and science fiction? And so I had just this idea kind of rolling around in my brain for a few months. And then one night I was falling asleep, and I was right in that space when you're like not quite awake anymore, but not quite sleeping yet, and I had a vision of Cinderella. And it was your very typical Cinderella. You know, she was running away from the ball because it was almost midnight, and her big poofy ball gown was billowing behind her, and she tripped on the palace steps. But instead of a glass slipper falling off, her foot fell off. And I woke up out of this dream and I thought, oh, her foot fell off because she's a cyborg. Like, that's what you would all think, right? So I got out of bed in the middle of the night and my head was just immediately filled with all of these ideas of who this Cinderella character was and what her world was like and what sort of problems she might face. And I spent about an hour just writing notes to myself, and Cinder's story kind of started to come together very quickly. Well, that was August of 2008, which meant it was a couple months before NaNoWriMo, which happens every November. Any Nanoers in the audience? Okay, awesome, lots of you. So Nano, for those of you who aren't familiar, it happens every November, and the idea is that people sign up on this website, nanowrimo.org, and you challenge yourself to write a 50,000-word novel during the 30 days of November.
I like this cover.
So back in 2008, I had done Nano twice. I had succeeded both times with my 50,000 words. So I was feeling really good about it. Like, I knew that I was capable of writing a 50,000-word novel. Plus, I had this idea for this cyborg Cinderella that I was super excited for. However, then I heard about another writing contest. And that contest was being held in Seattle, where I'm from, and the director of the Seattle area NaNoWriMo crew had somehow gotten hooked up with the director of an upcoming series of Star Trek. And they were hosting a contest that the Seattle area writer who wrote the most words that November would win a walk-on role in an episode of Star Trek. Okay, not a big enough reaction. Let's explain why this is a big deal. So I come from a very, very proud family of nerds. And the biggest nerd of my family, people think it's me, but oh no, that would be my Uncle Bob. And my Uncle Bob is a Trekkie. He is like the Trekkie to end all Trekkies. For example, my Uncle Bob has converted the attic of their house to resemble the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. Captain Kirk's chair and everything.
Wow.
It's awesome.
My dad would love that.
On top of that, I remember when one of the Star Trek movies came out when I was a little kid, my uncle took me and my brother to see it. Opening night, midnight showing and everything. But of course, in my family, you go to these things in costume. So we have pictures of me as a 6-year-old Klingon. And so I heard about this writing contest, and you could win a walk-on role on Star Trek. And I was like, oh, there was an ooh, thank you for the ooh. That's more appropriate. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to try to win this contest.
Maybe you should.
So I had a few months before November started, and I used that time very, very wisely. I did a little math, a little research, and I figured that to have a really great shot, I would have to write 150,000 words. So I did everything you could possibly do to prepare yourself. I outlined all 4 books in the series. By this point, I knew it was going to be a 4-book series. I created character profiles. I hunted down inspiration photos, like everything you could think to do. And then November 1st rolled around, and I wrote in every spare minute. I was working full-time. I don't know how I didn't get fired. I was also taking classes toward a master's degree. I don't know how I graduated. But somehow I didn't. And I wrote as much as I could during those 30 days. And at the end of the month, at 9:00 p.m. on November 30th, I submitted what I had done. And the word counters on the website told me that I had written 150,011 words. Yes! I was so proud of myself, and then I went and crashed in bed and was a zombie for like a week. Never wanted to write another word. But I eventually got over that, and a little while later, a couple weeks later, I went back to review what I had written. And during that month, I had written the first draft of Cinder and the first draft of Scarlet, and about a third of the first draft of Crest. And I opened up the document of Cinder thinking, oh, it's going to be genius. And I read it. It was not genius. I learned that you can't write a really great book in a month. However, I even though it was a mess and the characters were really flat and subplots like stopped existing halfway through, I still felt like it had a lot of potential, and I loved the concept and I loved the characters, and I thought I am going to try to make this happen. So after that first rush of inspiration, it took me 2 years to revise Cinder. I rewrote the first draft entirely from scratch. Went through about 4 or 5 revision rounds, 3 or 4 polishing rounds. I sent just to like 7 friends to critique for me. And 2 years later, finally, I felt like, okay, this is as good as I can make it. I am going to try to get published. And after that, I am one of those rare writers where things started to happen very, very quickly. I sent it to literary agents, and 2 months later, I signed with the first agent that I had queried. She and I worked on our submission package for 2 weeks. She sent the books out to publishers on a Friday, and we had our first offer the following Monday. Wow. So it happened really, really quickly. And my favorite part of that story is that the offer came in on November 1st, 2010. So it's exactly 2 years after I started writing it. So, you know, like the sky opened up and angels sang, and like it was meant to be. And of course it did eventually become Cinder and my first published novel. So now I know you're all like, okay, you wrote a book, we don't care. Did you get to be on Star Trek? That's the important question. And it breaks my heart every time, but no, I did not. I came in 3rd place.
Hello.
The worst part is I came in only 1,000 words behind the first place winner. And I submitted my words at 9 o'clock. Like I had 3 more hours that I could have written more. It kills me every time. But in the end, of course, the much bigger prize was becoming a published writer, which was my childhood dream. And so I'm super grateful, and nothing can take that away. So thank you. That's the story. Yay.